Awesome. I think you guys hit on a lot of the highlights of the assessment. I love seeing all this green all over the place. So green is anything above a 70 or a 70 and above. And you have areas like question 14, 86% of students got that right. Like we have whole standards that are mastered. 4C, every question, the average hit 70% or higher. So I think there's some really excellent data there. For F, same type of thing. So really great and things to be proud of, for sure. As we dive into the next part, though, the areas that we really want to focus on are the ones that seemed like students either mastered less or some questions they got and then some they didn't on the same standard. So I'd really like to start with 5A. Can you guys talk to me about 5A just generally?
You know, I broke it down by number. I don't know what question number that was.
Question numbers? Question 1, 7, 15,
Okay.
16, and 18 right here, this whole section.
Because the day afterwards, I went into the whole group and I picked out 4 or 5 of the lowest. You know, the next day 4 or 5 of the lowest SEs, which is some of those right there, and it just happened to be processing skills.
Yeah.
All the ones I pulled up, and I went over and kind of looked like, damn, these are processing skills. Thinking that if these were just regular multiple choice questions, more people would get them correct. So now you got to go back and like, okay, maybe ask them, well, maybe January we hit 2 more days of processing skill review after Christmas break. But it's a processing skill. I don't think it's well, those questions I looked at, because when I pointed out there was a question, I'll show you an example. When we go to, if you look at this one, for example, the first one, is based on recall and progressive error. So I know we had those classes, and I know we hit them so many times about the recall initiative and referendum.
Right.
So when I did this again in the class the next day, I still got a mixed reviews, and then I went back home and said, look, if you read this and you have a hard time understanding, look for the key words. You know, it's recall, okay, progressive error, and then I told them you got to analyze your answers just as well as you do your questions. It's almost like math. You got to check your answer, take your answers, and see if it matches with anything you say, man. And I keep telling them that. But it happened to be processing skills that most of the ones. I'm like, you know, it's like, dang.
So if we take a look at, I like where you're going with that, because looking at 5A, number 7 was only 5A, so not processing skills, just 5A in isolation, and they did well. And then number 16, same thing, 5A in isolation, and they did well. 15 and 1, like you're saying, were dual coded with a processing skill.
Oh yeah, you know what I told them on 15?
Yeah, what's going on with 15?
They know about Susan B. Anthony, most of them, and the 19th Amendment and stuff. All this is what I think threw them off. And I said, with these, you have to look down there too, because they'll give you a clue. And if you remember about Susan, and if this is confusing, if you remember where we talked about Susan B. Anthony again, you check your answers and see if anything comes close to it. So I think it's a reading comprehension, but they're not paying attention to the bottom part too, where a lot of times it can give you a clue if you don't understand what you're reading.
So, based on what you taught in the classroom, what association would you expect your students to make between
Susan B. Anthony, 19th Amendment, which was passed allowed all sex, all sex, and the women's suffrage movement. You know, tie those 3 together if you forget everything else we talk about, because that's really when you get the Jared book, that's really all they focus on.
So they would have been able to make just that quick association.
And most of them did. Some of them said that's what they did, and some of them they went through the LV8 moment. Like,
And how much time did you guys spend on that in class?
For the review, or when we?
No, for actually teaching like Susan B. Anthony, women's
I
suffrage,
don't know.
19th Amendment.
I think the pace for everything is the same. I don't try not to. I mean, reteaching you would have to spend more time, but as far as not knowing ahead of time if they're gonna. I mean, everything's. You know what I'm saying? There's not. I can't. It's hard to say. Well, I spent 10 minutes on this and 5 minutes on the other progressive error.
It was just
I try to use equal. I try to equal time, knowing they had to know this, though, knowing that probably on the STAR and ACP, Miss Susan B. Anthony in 19th Amendment, it's going to come up for sure. I mean, we don't make the test, but if I was a betting man.
Right. So I mean, and the only reason I bring that up, so if I were to go this is how I'm looking at it. If you were to go in your classroom tomorrow and take a poll,
Right.
and you said, okay, Susan B. Anthony, and don't give them any options, which amendment?
Exactly.
You know, how many of them would make that association?
Yeah, I'm willing to bet more than 50%,
More than 50%.
but, you know, I'd be like, okay, more than 50%.
Your highest picked answer choice on that one after, I mean, most kids did pick the 19th Amendment, even though it was a low question. The ones who got it right picked 19th Amendment. But the ones who didn't picked the 16th with a high.
Yeah, that's an income tax, and that's what I
Numbers, so-
explained that day too.
Taught in the same chapter.
Yeah, we went over the
Okay.
second,
So is there anything in that passage that would lead them to think income tax, or what might your reasoning be for why they would have picked
it's the same
A?
chapter, and not only that, remember, we did that, remember the last data meeting, we came up with that chart.
Right.
And it had all these, they had the 16th through 19th Amendment on that chart that we gave back to them.
Okay.
So they had it to study.
Uh-huh.
We made sure they had it, so I think that's I don't know, maybe
Oftentimes, what I've found is, particularly if there's a long reading passage, which they just don't want to do, because they're reluctant readers, they will usually pick A. If 19th Amendment had been choice A, there would have been a lot better result. It's just a default habit they've gotten into. And so, what I try to do is I try to tell them to take the full amount of time to read all answer choices, even if they're bored. Even if
Well,
it's
also,
not free.
yeah, and I also tell them, look, I know some of you don't like reading, but
So,
you have to take the time and do it, because you might find information in there that you.
so I see women. You mentioned women's suffrage, and it's the National Women's Suffrage Association's there,
And then you got this.
and then you've got Susan B. Anthony. Is there something that you're teaching them when they're reading these? Any strategies you're teaching them as they're reading those passages to highlight, maybe, and maybe ask them, don't highlight more than 5 things.
Being on
You
the
know,
test?
yeah, on
We'd
the
have to
test.
create down a test for everybody then, because that would bring a lot of money. If you want us to, we can.
Well, you don't just mean highlight physically, but also just highlight in their brains.
Oh,
Like,
Sure,
they
both.
just
I
stick
mean, they
out.
could write it down in the
I mean,
legend,
I'd be
but
glad
just
to
for
make-
them to identify that, hey, in this passage, it talks about women's suffrage,
And
and
you know
then I
what?
see Susan
I
B.
don't mean to
Anthony.
interrupt,
So.
but that's probably why a lot of people ask if they can write on the test, because I
Mhm.
guess they're taught to highlight and do that. I'm
Yeah.
sure
And
they
almost
have
all the
to-
ACPs are disposable, but ours is not.
Right.
It is now.
Sweet.
Remember last year? Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
if you.
Last year's first
I
year.
would-
I know
I
You
would-
want us to burn up the, well, I'll do it.
Yeah,
I'm just
I
somebody
would.
thinking.
I
okay,
would.
but
We
then-
can find out.
You did it?
I would. Are you okay with that?
We want to test for everybody so they can.
So I think if we look,
And-
I don't want us to stray too far from like the goals of the meeting, right? So
Okay.
if we look at number 15, they picked A or B, right? And both of those are amendments.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells us that they knew it was an amendment and not an act, right? Because you have the
Right.
Antitrust Act and the Federal Reserve Act.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like, and I know for me too, remembering different amendments and what they go with can just be challenging because that's rote
Yeah, that's what we did that
memorization.
chart
I have to
for.
remember 19 goes with this.
Mm-hmm.
So before the end of the semester, is there any part of your review that you think would help them make those connections, whether it's a mnemonic device or a memory tool?
Well, I think we do need to come up with something because we know on the ACP and the STAR, how can you not get away with questions on amendments? So
Right.
that is a good.
I've got a dumb little one that I didn't share with you, but that I wasn't trying to keep for myself. It has to do with common letters, like 16th and tax have X in common. 17th is for senators. 18th means you can't drink because you can't drink when you're 18. 19th is suffrage.
Well, we need to come up with maybe put that on like on a chart and
There's
print it
also-
up so we can get
So,
those.
yeah,
I mean, what do you think? I mean,
yeah, we should.
because we
definitely
already
go
did
for
the,
it.
you know, the last data meeting, we already did the chart on the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th Amendment.
Mhm.
Either some of them used it. I venture to say the ones that passed that question used the chart, and the ones that didn't pass it didn't use the chart and didn't do any, you know. So we got to find some other way to get to those ones who.
And she's used this rhythm, rock, and rhyme, which I think I showed you a couple years ago, if I remember correctly.
I just remember free citizen vote.
Free citizen vote, but but there's also rhythm, rock, and rhyme, and I don't have it on my phone, probably download my music, but it's the rap songs that actually there's 2 sets of them. What the Bill of Rights is the first, and then there's a second
Well,
section for
what we need to do-
like the video.
Just maybe come up with some kind of interaction class where we can get them to do it.
Like,
Because
you
we can
find
write
on
all that
YouTube
down,
with
doesn't mean
pictures
they're
and
gonna read it.
words.
So
Right.
you know, some kind of activity, even
Right.
just everybody's sounding on 16th is tag, 18th is
Yeah,
something, because
check out the rhythm.
we're not
rock, and
gonna-
rhyme. It's already made.
all the paperwork in the world is not gonna make them read it, so we have to do the paperwork plus some kind of activity in the class to
Mm-hmm.
think I did last year when I had to teach them some kind of activity with the Rhythm Rock and Rhyme on a YouTube video where they had to glean and take notes at the same. So like they had to see how many they could.
If you think that one, that last meeting we had when I asked you about that template with you think that would work? If someone says, I have this, I have that.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
You
I
think that
have
would
who
be-
has?
yeah, would
That
that
could
be-
be fun.
I have who has would be perfect for the amendments.
Okay.
And I'll get, like I said, I need to get you the template.
Oh, if you could do that, I appreciate that.
Template's easy and it would be a great way to check if MRS for right.
Yes, yeah,
Awesome.
It's a
So we'll loop back to detailed action steps around that. I just want to visit 18 for a moment because that's the last one in 5A that they struggled with, but it's also not dual coded. It's purely 5A, no graphs or charts. It's a fact question.
How many times we gone?
And we were
All
only
of that.
at about 60%.
God, we've been over it so many times.
So what do they need
Because
to know in order
that's
to answer it?
That's in that chart too that we did.
What,
Yeah,
do,
it
what do they
totally
need
is.
to know?
The phrase in the question is increased public participation.
Okay.
That should be the key phrase that they should associate with direct election U.S. senators.
And a lot of them chose D.
The Federal Reserve System.
I don't know why they would.
So is that chart that they
That
did
deals with
on
money.
the professor?
And that's what when I talk when I talked about Federal Reserve System or Federal Reserve Act, I kept tying it. When you see this word money, 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 and I say so many darn times. For them to pick that has nothing to do with money. I'm pulling my hair out.
So the key phrase increased public participation, that's something that was said in class, written in notes,
Right.
or like it's a common phrase that they would have seen?
Right, and this would be a tricky question, and I'd understand why they missed it more if other choices had been recall or referendum or initiative, because then they would all be true.
Right.
Yeah, direct election. Okay, that's the thing, is they have got to remember that direct election means that they directly vote for the senators and not state legislatures electing senators, because that's how it was before the 17th Amendment was passed. And getting them to think in terms of a historic perspective of how things used to be and then how they changed
Okay.
can be difficult, because it takes a lot of abstract thinking.